Crowds of retirees filled the streets of Paris on the 6th of November 2025, marching under banners of red and white as union balloons floated above them. According to the CGT union, around 6,000 people joined the rally, part of a nationwide day of protest organised by an inter-union coalition representing pensioners and public sector workers. Their goal to oppose proposed budget cuts and defend purchasing power amid rising inflation. The demonstration began near the city's central boulevards, where retirees carrying umbrellas in union colours marched together through the rainy capital. The procession was led by representatives from France's major trade unions, including the CGT, FSU, and several retirees associations, all warning that government measures could severely affect pensioners' living conditions. In the crowd, chants called for justice for retirees and fair pensions. Protesters waved placards demanding higher pensions, better funding for hospitals and nursing homes, and an end to policies that they said penalise those on modest incomes. Sophie Binet, the General Secretary of the CGT union, addressed journalists before the march began. She outlined three main demands supported by the movement. Today, the protesters have three demands. One, pension reform measures to match the inflation. Two, abandoning the doubling of medical co-payments. And three, funding hospitals and nursing homes in line with their needs, because right now it's far from sufficient. This triple penalty is catastrophic for retirees who are mobilising across France in more than 100 demonstrations organised by a united inter-union coalition, she added. The unions say their protest represents a growing frustration among older citizens who feel they have been left behind by successive austerity measures. Demonstrations similar to Paris took place in more than 100 French cities, including Lyon, Marseille, Lille, and Toulouse. The government has yet to clarify which parts of the proposed 2026 budget will directly affect retirees, but officials have floated the idea of freezing some pension benefits and reducing subsidies for health services. Retirees argue that these measures would hit lower and middle-income pensioners hardest, many of whom already struggle with the cost of living. Sylvain Goldstein, a retired executive now living in public housing, joined the march holding a handwritten sign calling for pension protection. In his remarks, he painted a vivid picture of how even a modest pension can become unsustainable under inflationary pressure. Of course, there are people who were able to save, build wealth, etc. We shouldn't deny that. I, for example, live in public housing. I used to be an executive. I now live in public housing and am retired. My only possessions, roughly speaking, are my TV, my sofa and my bed, he explained. Goldstein began working at the age of 17 and retired just 2 months earlier at 65. Despite decades of work, he said he does not feel financially secure. I don't think I'm particularly wealthy or have had it all, he said. His story underscores a larger trend among France's ageing population, rising living costs and limited income growth, leaving many with declining purchasing power. In another statement, Goldstein summarised the protesters' central demand. What we're asking for is that pensions are not frozen because inflation is significant and freezing pensions means a loss of purchasing power. We also want retirement funds to be properly increased and an end to raising the retirement age. The issue of pension adjustments remains politically sensitive in France. After the government's controversial pension reform of 2023, which raised the legal retirement age from 62 to 64, unions warned that any further erosion of pension rights could reignite widespread unrest. Many retirees view the current budget debate as a continuation of that struggle. Marie-Laurence Moros, co-leader of the retirees section of the FSU union, criticised policymakers for portraying pensioners as privileged. Of course, some retirees have assets, but we're not Bernard Arnault by any means. And you should know that all these measures would apply to retirees who earn on average €1,660 per month. Are they the privileged ones, the real privileged in our society, she asked. For many protesters, the comparison with France's wealthiest elites served to highlight growing inequality. Unions argue that while retirees' incomes stagnate, energy, rent and healthcare costs continue to rise faster than inflation. The CGT says that maintaining pension indexation to real inflation is essential to prevent millions from slipping below the poverty line. Among the marchers was Pierre Levi, a 9-year-old former civil servant who worked for the Paris City Hall. He spoke quietly but firmly about his financial situation. I was a civil servant in local government working at the Paris City Hall. My pension is about €1,600 now, so I don't think we are wealthy. Whether in local government, state or hospital sectors, the majority of civil servants are Category C employees who therefore do not receive generous pensions when they retire, he said. Levi's comments reflected a broader concern among France's public sector retirees who fear that future adjustments may further erode their modest benefits. Category C workers, who make up the majority of municipal and hospital employees, often retire with less than €1,700 a month, barely above the national minimum wage threshold. The protesters' banners read, "Defend our pensions and healthcare is not a luxury." Others demanded greater investment in EGPADs, France's nursing home network, and in hospitals that have been struggling with funding shortages since the COVID-19 pandemic. Throughout the march, trade union leaders emphasized unity among organizations that have often competed for influence in the past. The Inter-Union Platform for Retirees brought together the CGT, FSU, FO and Solidaires federations, marking one of the broadest joint mobilizations since the pension protests of 2023. Across France, the demonstrations underscored growing discontent over the government's handling of pension and health funding reforms. The Ministry of Finance has defended its proposed spending limits, saying they are necessary to reduce public debt and ensure the long-term sustainability of social programs. However, unions argue that the state's debt management cannot come at the expense of pensioners' basic welfare. The CGT and allied unions accuse the government of prioritising fiscal discipline over social justice. They point to rising costs of healthcare, energy and housing, areas where retirees spend the bulk of their income, as evidence that any freeze on pension adjustments would directly erode quality of life. Economists note that the protests reflect a structural problem. France's pension system relies heavily on intergenerational funding, meaning the active workforce pays for current retirees. As inflation rises, pension increases lag behind wage growth, deepening the financial strain for those on fixed incomes. At the march, Sophie Binet insisted that the country's retirees are not asking for privilege, but for fairness. She argued that linking pensions to inflation is a matter of social stability. Unions have urged the government to commit to annual automatic adjustments based on the Consumer Price Index, rather than ad hoc increases decided by ministers. Meanwhile, the debate over medical co-payments has become another flashpoint. The government has proposed doubling patient contributions for consultations and prescriptions, a move that unions warn would hit the elderly and chronically ill hardest. Many retirees say such changes would discourage people from seeking necessary medical care, worsening long-term health outcomes. Marie-Laurence Moros of the FSU union said the proposed policy would unfairly burden those living on average pensions. All these measures would apply to retirees who earn on average €1,660 per month, she said, stressing that those are not high incomes by French standards. The protests also carried a symbolic weight. Since France's mass pension reform strikes 2 years earlier, retirees have continued to play a visible role in labour mobilisation, joining teachers, healthcare workers and transport unions in coordinated demonstrations. The November 6 protest was one of the largest retiree-led marches since 2023, signalling enduring frustration with the direction of economic policy. Many participants said they viewed the government's budget plans as part of a broader shift toward austerity. While officials argue that fiscal restraint is necessary to comply with European budget rules, critics say such policies undermine the social model that has long defined post-war France. Public opinion remains divided. Polls suggest that while most French citizens support protecting pension value against inflation, a majority also back government efforts to reduce the deficit. The challenge for policymakers will be balancing fiscal goals with growing social discontent. In Paris, as the march dispersed near the Place de la République, union leaders vowed to continue their campaign They called for further demonstrations in the coming weeks if their demands remain unanswered. The protest ended peacefully, with police reporting no major incidents. But union officials said the turnout reflected a deeper anger simmering beneath the surface. This is not just about retirees, one CGT organiser told reporters off camera. It's about what kind of society we want to build, one that supports people after decades of work or one that abandons them. As the evening fell, demonstrators folded their banners and headed home through the wet streets of Paris. The sound of whistles and drums faded, but the message remained clear. Retirees across France are demanding respect, fairness and protection from inflation's grip. Retirees' unions say they will continue to press for pension indexation, healthcare affordability and adequate funding for public services, warning that without action, the cost of living crisis will deepen for millions of France's elderly citizens.